And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to on.net Live. I'm your host, Cecil Phillip. And today I have a very special guest, David. And David's going to be talking to us about OmniSharp. And I'm really excited to talk about OmniSharp with David. But before we do that, Happy New Year to everyone. This is our first stream of the year. We all know 2020 was a rough year for a lot of us. And, we're hoping the most of 2021 will be a little bit better. So, I hope all of you had a great holiday break if you took one. I hope you had a great New Year and spent time with your family and your friends and really just, took some time off to enjoy the moment. But we're going to get back into the world of .NET today. We're going to start talking about a lot of cool stuff. But first, why don't we start off with David? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm a software developer here in North Carolina. Doing mainly .NET, a lot of JavaScript, TypeScript as well. And then I got introduced in open source about 7 years ago, 7 years ago, back when .NET was, or ASP.NET Core was, ASP.NET VNext and ASP.NET 5, all that kind of stuff. I got introduced and sucked into this world of open source and OmniSharp and everything else. From there, just to expand my horizons, and the key motivator for me was when they broke Visual Studio, and I still wanted to work with the latest .NET Core stuff and not write in Notepad. Found some of these projects, and thought I could contribute, and sort of kept going from there.
Nice. And so I want to learn a little bit more about your origin story, David. Could you tell me or tell us how exactly did you get started with programming, and more particularly, how did you get started with .NET?
I mean, I've always wanted to do programming. It's very corny, very nerdy. I printed out the PHP manual at 14 or 13 or something like that, and just said, do some stuff. I did a bunch of hacking, not hacking, but I was hacking away at the code of a bulletin board written in Perl of all things. This was back in the 90s or something. I thought, I can add theming to this or something somehow. And that was just sort of my introduction early on as a teenager. Be like, yeah, that's probably what I want to end up being or end up doing for a career. And then from there, I had through some fates, I went in. I thought, okay, I would do computer engineering, right? Computer engineering is going to be a better way to do it. Yeah, computer engineering kicked me out. Actually, it wasn't computer engineering. It was more linear algebra. At the time, I didn't understand M and N dimensions. I might understand a little bit more now, but probably still not, to be honest. So that took me to a 2-year program at community college back in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, where I was born. And from there, I just sort of grew and kept going. One thing I always try to do is continue to learn and always think about what can I learn, and then how can I apply that to my work or my job and that kind of stuff. Just because it makes I just enjoy that learning part and finding out the different kind of languages and styles and stuff people can do.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I always find, I don't want to say some of the best developers, but some of the developers that create some really interesting projects are always the ones that work on code after work. On your spare time, or when you're kind of just messing around with stuff and be like, hey, let me see what happens if I do this, or let me see what happens if I do that. And you kind of get into that experimental phase, right? You try to plug pieces together and kind of see what comes out when you're done with it. Do you consider yourself kind of in that boat a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's the work I do for work, and then there's the stuff that I can do outside work that's not work. OmniSharp and that kind of thing, like working in an IDE and editing text and that kind of stuff, was never a priority for what I did at work. I mean, you do business development. It was contract management software at the time, and so that has its domain and it has its uses and pays the bills. But then there's some of these other things out there that I like to explore and figure out. And then sometimes you bring it back to work, sometimes you can't. Right. At the end of the day, it's about learning and expanding your horizons. And then, at least for me, I find it a good challenge. And then when someone has a question, they're like, how can I do X, Y, Z? And you can come along and say, oh, I'm, try this, this, or this. And they're like, where'd you get that from? I don't know. It's in my Rolodex in my head somewhere.
Right. I know, like those are conversations I used to have a lot with folks at conferences. And it was one of the things that I definitely miss about like regular interaction with folks, like just, going to camps locally and going to different conferences and just meeting people and having someone have the question like, hey, how do I do this or that or the other? I'm like, oh, hey, I have a demo for that. Or, hey, I have a thing on my GitHub, or, I was working through the same issue or something. I'm like, let me show you how I figured it out. Like those organic conversations for me are like so much harder to have in like this virtual setting. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we figure out a way to either like enable that or figure out a way how we can get back together in a safe way. But I definitely miss that like so much.
Yeah, I miss the conferences. I miss the meetups. I usually went to the big monthly meetup they do around here, and the virtual ones they're good and the content's great, and I love the speakers, but I never went for the content or the speakers. No offense to them. I mean, I've spoken at them. I went for the people, the interactions, the networking opportunities, those kind of things. Those are important. And this whole situation we're in right now has sort of shown that some of that is harder to do, especially in a virtual space.
Right. So tell me really quickly. I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on this. What are some of the things that you're really interested about, or that you're really excited about in the world of .NET for this year?
So let's see, for .NET. I mean, we just got .NET 5. .NET 5 is pretty awesome. And getting that out of there, getting that has been useful. But let's see, what do we got for the future? That's a tough question. Oh my. I mean, I can't wait for .NET 6. Now that I have an Apple M1 notebook, I can't wait to see what .NET running natively on M1 is going to be like. Hopefully they can fix some of the remaining issues for
Dad is in a meeting.
For the sorry, my daughter has decided that she's going to invade our bedroom. And then I'm excited to see the rest of the bugs for .NET 5 on Rosetta getting ironed out, and then figure out how can we, at least on the OmniSharp side, make sure we can work with those ideas as well. I don't know if there's other things that I enjoy about .NET. A lot of the reactive programming, are reactive programming, reactive UI. All those kind of projects are really interesting and intriguing to me. I've done a lot of RxJS. Was a contributor at one point for the library for making it better for TypeScript. And so I'd like to see more of those things sort of leak into the .NET space. It is kind of and sort of. I mean, there's the channels API that's very similar, but it accomplishes a different task.
Yeah, I agree with you. Channels is definitely very cool. I played with that a little bit last year in a few projects that I worked on. I know for me, some of the things that I want to take a look at for this, for the next 12 months, definitely Blazor. I haven't spent a lot of time with Blazor, so I definitely want to look at that a little bit. I feel like I've spent a lot of my time doing backend stuff, like a lot of web APIs and working with databases and queuing systems and things like that. Definitely want to spend some time with Blazor.
Yeah, you remind me about Blazor. That's actually really compelling scenarios. So on the OmniSharp side, I work on a library that implements the language server protocol, which is what VS Code uses to, here's completions. It's just a standardization of this is the completion API for an editor. But then the Azure Bicep team, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bicep project they're working on. It's basically the next evolution of ARM templates. It says, so instead of writing JSON, you're writing more of a codified document. So they're using that for a lot of their why Siri. They're using that they're using the language server protocol for implementing their language server and their whole language, which is awesome. But then one of their developers came along and was like, how can I run this in Blazor? And he ran a couple issues. And in his case, he was running Monaco as the front end. And then there's a library for language server protocol for Monaco, which is the editor, the core editor of Visual Studio Code. And then how can he spin that up in Blazor? So I was able to get in there after a little bit, get it fixed up and working. And so now you can actually host your language server in the browser without any connections to a machine or anything like that.
Are you serious? Oh, that sounds cool.
It was really cool, actually. There's a demo somewhere. I'll have to see if I can find it.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, I've never heard about that, but that sounds really cool.
And so like that's for like the experimental environments, right? Like docs or playgrounds, that kind of stuff. Just to be able to spin it up, it's C# running in the browser. You don't have to have a back end or anything.
Right. All right. So David, I kind of feel like we've used that word OmniSharp a few times. I think it's about time we kind of talk about it, right? Like, let's tell folks, what is it? Like, what exactly is OmniSharp, and what's the goal behind it?
So I mean, OmniSharp is a couple of different things. For the original name that most people know about it as, it's the engine behind Visual Studio's or Visual Studio Code's C# support. So IntelliSense completions, syntax highlighting, all of those kind of things. But then on the backside, there's also other things that people may not be aware of. So there's people in the community that have created clients for Emacs or Vim, or we had Atom at one point, but sort of let that slip to the wayside. And so those, it becomes that, I like to call it a Visual Studio in a box. So it's kind of like you put a box in Visual Studio and start calling APIs into it. And my fourth goal now has been to build a very C# native. It's really not C# like .NET native, but like a C# native experience for interacting with the language server protocol, so that it becomes familiar and easy for .NET developers to pick up if they want to just write their own language server. And so now OmniSharp implements it, although we still have our custom protocol. So we're trying to migrate away from the custom protocol to the language server protocol. We're not quite there yet. But it's also used by the PowerShell tooling team. So the VS Code extension for PowerShell uses our library as well as the Razor language server in Visual Studio Code, and Azure Bicep, as we were talking about before.
Okay. And so when we talk about language server, because I want to make sure we explain all the terms so everyone understands. Yeah. So when we talk about language server for various types of editors, right? Like whether it's VS Code or Vim or Emacs or those types of things. The language server, I'm guessing, is the mechanism, right, or the service that's running in the background to give you information about the code that you're writing or the project that you're working on. So kind of like what you mentioned, maybe things like syntax highlighting, some tokenization, I'm sure is happening there in the background. Things like autocomplete, I'm guessing, happen in there, and probably some tons of other features as well. Would that be correct?
Yeah, no, you're correct. Absolutely. So completion, hover, signature help, find all references, find implementation, all of those kind of things are parts of the language server protocol. And the language server protocol is extensible, so you can do your own custom ones. But the core part is, as long as a server supports as much of the protocol as it possibly can within reason. I mean, some servers may implement highlighting, they may not, for whatever reason. The editor can sort of pick it up and say, oh, I know how to do that, so I will now start calling that API. Right. Very, back in the old web days, it was progressive enhancement, right? So draw the HTML, then do the JavaScript and add interaction after the fact. So language server protocol has sort of evolved to be that as well. It's, here's how you interact with the client. Here's how we do text changes. And then from there, the server can, kick back diagnostics to say, you got a compiler error in line 5 at column 10 or whatever it may happen to see. And then code lens or code actions and start doing actually like changing the document in the editor. But as you said, it allows multiple clients to exist and multiple servers to exist. So, we have like a great ecosystem of servers today. There's, a Red Hat Java server. There's, YAML, Go, Python, all these things that, one of the reasons that I sort of stayed away from languages like Python was just the intimidation. I mean, am I babied with IntelliSense? You could argue that, but it's not really that I'm being babied. I'm just more productive. Back when I was doing like pure JS and you had no tooling, you had MDN open, you had the jQuery API documents if you're using jQuery, right? Because you didn't remember all those method names. That's what things like IntelliSense and those kind of features are useful for. It just tells you what it thinks it has or what it knows it has, and it makes your life decrypting that a lot easier. So you can have multiple servers and multiple clients. And so as long as a client can know how to start up the server, it can then interact with it in a client native way.
Right. And I'm looking in the chat really quickly, and we have someone from Twitch saying machine learning autocomplete is like tab is useful, like Tabine, I'm guessing, is useful too. So they're saying like machine learning with autocomplete as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Microsoft project, the what is it, IntelliCode, I think, is what they
branded
it at. Right. So the IntelliCode then enhances the completions and says, based on their ML of GitHub. I don't know why I said Google. Based on that information that they glean from all these open source projects for that language, that these methods are the most popular or the most commonly called. And then that stuff's kind of amazing.
Is there any reason why that stuff can't be a part of OmniSharp? Or is there a reason it's separate?
I don't know if there's a particular reason that it's separate. I mean, they built more the engine for the completion point of view.
Right.
I honestly don't know. I have never been approached by them, so I'm not sure.
Sure. Well, maybe they'll watch this video, right? And they'll be like, hey, David, we need to have a conversation about it.
I mean, whatever they've done, because Visual Studio Code allows you to do like middleware and stuff for completions. I mean, it works with OmniSharp. IntelliCode works with OmniSharp, TypeScript, and I think Python at this point.
Right. So we got another question coming in here from Twitch, and someone is asking, are compilation errors found by a precompiler or the language server, or are they pretty much one and the same in C#?
So in C#, they're very much one and the same. So OmniSharp, the actual project that is being used in Visual Studio Code, there's two parts. There's the client via OmniSharp VS Code, and there's OmniSharp Roslyn. So we build on top of the Roslyn tooling that exists, which is used in Visual Studio to give you, the compilation and stuff like that. It runs in a mode called design time mode. So you're designing your application, you're building your application. So there's different things that happen within the server than when you're running just the compiler straight by itself.
Got it. Okay. One question I wanted to ask you about was, so there's Roslyn, right? What is OmniSharp's relationship when it comes to Roslyn?
So we consume Roslyn just as a library. So you include, Microsoft Code Analysis, C# NuGet package. At its very simple level. That we include the Roslyn NuGet package, and there's some other stuff to do with MS Build, loading MS Build files so that you get. Because you have to sort of combine everything. So you got to get all the files that you need to compile, put them in a workspace or a solution inside of Roslyn, and then you can start interrogating and investigating that stuff for information.
Got it.
So,
okay.
What is this type at this point on this line, for example?
Sure. So Roslyn. So Roslyn, for the folks that are in the chat too that may not be familiar, is pretty much the C# or the .NET compiler as a library, right? You can consume it as a service. So I'm guessing in the background, OmniSharp is using it to compile code. I'm guessing that's what it's doing. Like it's compiling and inspecting code, maybe.
In essence, it's compiling it.
Okay.
But now Roslyn, especially within the design time mode, has a lot of work done to it to allow for bad code to exist, and for the rest of the code to just continue to quote unquote work. So as you're typing, this dot, as you're typing whatever method name you're trying to call, it'll give you the red squigglies where you're at. But everywhere else in the file, it's still aware that the variable below you is a variable, and it doesn't, so there's a lot of hard work that the C# and the Roslyn developers have put in to make it very amenable to having even errors inside of these documents. As it's compiling it.
Right. Okay. And so for me as a .NET developer, right, like I installed the .NET CLI, I install VS Code, or I have Visual Studio proper. Do I just have OmniSharp? Is it just like automatically on my machine? Like how exactly does this work?
I don't think the OmniSharp extensions installed the VS Code natively, but I mean, once you have it installed, at least for our install experience, what happens is the VS Code extension for C# will reach out and see if there's a new version to download, and it'll download automatically if it doesn't exist on your machine.
Okay.
And there's some configurations in there if you want to pin to a certain version or try the latest ones that come out. And so every time you start, you might get a new one. How we do our work is everything that goes to our master branch does get pushed out to Azure Storage. That can then be consumed by other clients to know, oh, there's a new version out. So even if it's before the actual pin, before we've actually run a release, you can try out the new preview bits.
Got it. Okay. So why don't we, I really want to start looking at a demo or a sample or whatever to kind of see how things are going. Why don't we switch over to your desktop really quick, and then we can continue our conversation as we kind of look and see what are some of the things that this enables.
Sure.
All right, so we're looking at VS Code right now, and you got some stuff on. So what are we taking a look at?
So this is the actual OmniSharp Roslyn source code. So I mean, it is just a console app. There's nothing super special with it. Hold on 1 second.
Sure, no worries. No worries. Because those are one of the things that I always used to wonder is whenever I start up VS Code and I look in the little at the bottom of the terminal, I'll always in that area that you're in, I'll always see some OmniSharp log messages.
Yep.
I'm just where did this come from? I didn't turn it on. Where did this thing just kind of materialize on my machine?
Yeah, so this there's a couple things in here that are interesting that you can sort of look at. I don't know why there's all 4 of them. This one, there are 5, I guess. We probably should consolidate some of that. But one thing is there will be the wow, I just lost it. One of these, so this is all the log messages from OmniSharp. So, for example, if I hover over this right here, it's gone to the OmniSharp server and said, I want quick info, which is what we've called a hover. It goes and says, it's this document on these lines. And then it responds with the markdown content that says, oh, it's this C# code. And so the VS Code goes and runs that through its formatter and renders it as HTML because that's what VS Code is using. And so that's the actual responses. In the C# one, you'll see it where it's actually downloading it. So if I could type the right buttons, I apparently can't.
What, are you trying to open the terminal?
No, I'm not trying to open the terminal. I'm trying to open options. My other computer's in the other room, and so I'm using a remote desktop software, and it doesn't like all my keybind things, I guess. Settings. I can't type today.
It's all good.
You got user settings.
Oh, if you want user settings, you can just there you go. You got it.
It's just been one of those days. It's not even in here. Crap.
You're looking for OmniSharp settings?
No, it's the user JSON. Is it JSON setting? Nope.
If you want the
There
JSON
we are.
file.
There we go.
Oh, that thing. Okay.
This is how that, I'm old. I'm old school Visual Studio Code.
Got it. Okay.
I just got used to it. So you can actually come in here and in the path we can set latest. And so this will download and install the latest version. It pops up. And so this is where that C# comes into play. So if you don't have a version of OmniSharp, for example,
right.
Install it, it'll go off and reach and download it. And so this is kind of an interesting thing for people to sort of understand is that we have to build in support for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And so as part of that, our pipeline is set up to build all 3 of those environments. But an extra effort is made for Linux and Mac. So if you don't have .NET installed, or we can't find Mono in the path, or we can't find all these all these different possible options. Like there's different ways that Mono gets installed. There's different ways that .NET can get installed. And so we actually ship a little micro version of Mono with just the libraries that we expect that someone's going to need. Mm-hmm. And so that we can continue to work even if they don't have all the right dependencies installed in the right magic way, which causes us some pain, but it is useful to understand that it's there. So now I've installed the latest beta version, so I can go look at the program, and it should still work, hopefully, unless we broke something. And so now we have this beta version installed.
Cool. And then you kind of touched on something that someone in the chat was asking, and this question is coming from YouTube. Person is asking, OmniSharp uses Mono on Mac OS, right? Question mark. And could you explain that? And are there options to move to .NET Core?
So that's a question I get regularly, and we get regularly. So yeah, we use Mono, this little micro Mono, unless we can find a real Mono that exists. There's a bunch of other different things when it comes to like MS Build versions. So there's been cases where we've had to be using a Mono version that doesn't exist yet, because it supports the later SDKs for .NET 5 or .NET 6 coming out at some point in the future. So we sort of run into that. As far as why it doesn't run on .NET Core, there's a bunch of different reasons. When you're running on .NET Core, you kind of get pinned, and so you can't run different .NET Core versions. So if you're working on a .NET 5, sometimes we get caught and we can't build a .NET 3, or vice versa. And so there's a bunch of like weird little intricacies about how .NET Core works versus Mono. It's something we'd like to do. It's something we're certainly exploring, at least having the ability to say, here's the .NET Core version of OmniSharp, and having that configured through the client. But it more comes down to the breadth of support. So we also support the Unity development. So Unity will open up to us. You can add VS Code as your editor for Unity, and it'll open up a Unity project. And so as you're a Unity developer, those don't work on Core. Those projects are not supported yet. We've been, a couple of the guys on the team have been talking to the Unity developers to figure out, can we get this migrated to a Core, not Core, but a new SDK style project so that we can load those properly. So part of the reason that we still stick to Mono is because we have support beyond just .NET Core. We have to support, even try as best we can, or old desktop .NET projects as well.
Right.
So that's kind of why we stay there. On Windows, it's the same reason we use just .NET Desktop Framework as opposed to .NET Core, because we can do all of the desktop stuff, assuming you have all the correct MS Build SDK bits installed.
Right. So we know this works in VS Code. Is OmniSharp in Visual Studio proper, like Visual Studio for Mac and VS also, or is that not needed there?
No, yeah. So it's a Visual Studio proper and Visual Studio for Mac. Those are all built by Microsoft, and so they have their own tooling built around Roslyn for that.
Got it. So then I guess that leads into another question. Then, is OmniSharp a Microsoft project, or like who owns this?
So I guess it was a year ago. About a year ago, we finally joined the .NET Foundation, so technically the foundation owns it. Okay. But the project itself has always been community-driven. We've had resources from Microsoft, so we've had a few people that help out with the project, and we still do. I mean, the names change every once in a while, but they're employed by Microsoft, but they don't own the project.
Got it.
They're just helping build tooling. So Microsoft does a lot of the work on the OmniSharp VS Code client, so they much more closely own that than OmniSharp Roslyn itself.
Got it. So then from the backend side of it, right? So I'm guessing like OmniSharp, like there's a backend and a front end. It's kind of like its own application, right? And the backend, there's the language server, which again gives you, like introspective information about the code that you're writing. Again, like we said, like highlighting and doing some like lightweight compilation, like those types of things. And then there's the front end, like I guess the C# extension for VS Code, or Vim and like some of these other things that like will consume that server data, right? And then kind of, plug together to make the experience what we expect it to be.
Exactly. So I just opened up the OmniSharp VS Code project. So it's a VS Code extension. It's all TypeScript. So for how they call completion, or how we call completion today, there's this function you provide VS Code, say I want to provide completion items, and you call create request and say I want to create the request for this text document position. So this is just a helper function, and things like what is the trigger character? Did you hit dot? Did you hit a brace for like calling a method, or those kind of things? So those can all influence the completions you bring back, and sending that, and then we convert it back to the VS Code object that they want to show the completions.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So, and I guess what that also means now too, from an open source perspective, is that people that want to contribute to OmniSharp, like they can always go to the GitHub repo and do so, because it's not owned by a corporation, like a corporate, Microsoft entity. Then you could go ahead and if there's a feature that you don't like, or something you want to improve, or something you want to contribute, you can create an issue, you could write some code, and then you can kind of get going.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the one part that I really need to work on is just sort of the getting started documentation and getting into it. For the most part, you can just run our build script and get up and running, but that only answers the how do I get it to produce a DLL or produce an executable that I can run. It doesn't help you with the problem of, well, where's the code that I need to change, and what are the other kinds of constraints. We've had some great contributions in the past from the community. So we do now support Roslyn analyzers and diagnostics. That's a couple years ago, I guess it was the last live MPV. No, I think it was I can't remember exactly what it was. It's been a couple of years, but that was contributed by the community. He's like, I just wanted it done and got it done. And so, I'd love to have more people contribute if you're ready and willing. I will admit that I never thought I'd be building for better or for worse, a text editor or something that is working with a text editor.
Sure,
it just wasn't part of my
list of things.
My goals. It was, I do business software, and maybe I'll do some game development at some point. It was never, I'm going to make a tool that helps other people build tools for other people. I think
that's one of the benefits of open source, right? Like it opens us up to these scenarios and situations that we normally probably wouldn't even know about, or be even participating in, right? Like now you're able to have conversations and work with developers from like all over the place that are relying on your project and contributing to your project, and just in general, like kind of just doing it out of charity for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought, honestly, for myself, I never thought I was smart enough. And then I learned that it's not smarts or anything like that. It's just you have to learn it, right? And anything you don't know doesn't mean you're dumb. You just don't know it.
Sure.
The one thing I always say at work, and people I drive people nuts. There's no dumb questions. There's only dumb repeat questions, right? Yeah. You can ask me the same question once. I'll take it twice, maybe 3 times. You keep asking the same question, you're not helping yourself because you're actually not absorbing the information I'm giving you. Possibly I'm failing to give it to you properly, which is why I'll answer it a couple of times. But after a little while, there's no dumb questions. I'll take dumb questions. I won't take dumb questions, but I'll take questions all day long, because I don't mind to answer it, because all a question is you not knowing. Right. And if I have that knowledge and you don't have that knowledge, I can help share that.
Right, and I think that's a good point. And also for folks that are in the chat right now, I know we have guests and visitors from all over the place. If any of you have questions for David, go ahead and drop it in the chat. Like you said, no question is a stupid question. So if you have any questions about .NET, if you have questions about OmniSharp and VS Code, go ahead and ask them, and then we'll make sure that we take care of your question right here live on the stream.
And here's code actions in work, or in work. Wow. In action. Code actions in action.
Nice.
There you go. All right, so it converts the code. But then because VS Code knows how to deal with the language server, it can manage its undo stack for you. And you just do your control Z and you're good to go. One thing I am planning to look at, and I know one of the other team members is the M1 Max, and we talked about it earlier. There is no, why do I need to restart OmniSharp to make it work? Yeah, that's something we're working on. There has been a lot of development and a lot of man hours put into Visual Studio, like a product like Visual Studio or Rider, ReSharper, where they're dedicated staff hours, where they're paying them lots of money. And so they put on optimizations and stuff to offload memory. The big reason you have to restart is memory usage, to be 100% honest. And it's something we want to look at to address. But we just have to sort of sit down and figure out what is it? How do we do it? How do we organize it? Do we cache it as SQLite? Do we do this? And there's a bunch of options, and we've discussed it with some of the Microsoft people as well, because we know that's a problem, and we'd like to fix it. But there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so many hours for open source in the day as well.
Yeah. David, I mean, that almost sounds like a little bit of a community outreach for help, right? So,
can always use help.
What's that?
Can always use help.
Yeah. So I know a lot of folks are in the chat right now. One of the things that we always want to encourage you to do, if you like the projects, if you like these open source projects and you use them, definitely think about contributing to them. David, I know you mentioned a little while ago that the getting started experience isn't well documented or as well documented as you'd like it to be. Are you or someone on the team able to, I don't know, spend a little bit of time like going through the setup? Or you know what? Maybe we could even do a stream sometime in the future where we, maybe I'll be your student for one day, right? And you show me how to get OmniSharp set up, and we kind of walk through that experience to see, what it's like, and hopefully we could use that as unofficial documentation. You know what I mean? For people that want to
at
learn.
least use it to produce some documentation and just go over the problems that you run into and write them down right away.
Yeah, that might be a good thing for us to do.
Yeah, but definitely be fun.
For anyone that might be interested, maybe does OmniSharp have, I guess, a Skitter channel, Slack channel?
So we do have a Slack today. I don't have Slack open right now, but there's an OmniSharp Slack, and there should be a link. So if we go to the repository, should be a link in here for it, hopefully.
Okay. I
could type, which I cannot. Yeah, so there's the link for Slack. If it's not working, let me know, because that would be bad. But there are people that join periodically. Okay. I've thought about trying to consolidate that with some of the other more community areas. I just haven't figured out what the right one is yet.
Sure.
And so I don't want to be like, let's move here, and then a couple months later, let's move here.
Right.
I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff around Discord these days, and there's a couple cool .NET Discords out there.
And there's GitHub discussions now too. I don't know if you've played with that. But
there's GitHub discussions. I haven't turned that on yet. I don't think, but I probably should, just to have it there as a place to talk.
Yeah.
So I'll probably go and do that after this.
Nice. Cool.
And then all our repositories are on GitHub under OmniSharp. The big ones are pinned. So VS Code, Roslyn, C# Language Protocol. It's the website. I think that's the website. One of them's website. Oh, this was because GitHub didn't have projects and stuff like that. So,
got it. All right.
It was years ago.
My next question for you. What do you think are the next big issues or areas of focus for OmniSharp going forward?
So I want to get the compatibility with M1. I do want to really look at the memory usage. Mm-hmm. And another sort of like overreaching, achieving goal. The biggest problem I find with OmniSharp, especially when I'm doing like work, is the testing experience is not as good as like it is in Rider or with ReSharper or with Test Explorer and Visual Studio. Yeah. And I think that's the place that we're really lacking. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. I don't know if anyone's actually thought about the ramifications of what those tools are actually doing under the covers to figure out what tests do you have, what are they. In the case of XUnit, if you have like theories and stuff, it expands those theories and shows them to you. Mm-hmm. Right, so there's a lot of stuff to do there. But I think to really make the tool better, we need to have a goal of trying to make that test experience as integrated as possible. One thing I was reading the other day, the VS Code, they're going to be adding native support for a Test Explorer-like feature. So I think now is a great time to sort of go down that path of how can we integrate with that tool instead of build it ourselves. Sure. And that's sort of my goal, is to figure out what does that look like for test discovery, test running, and how can we make it really hardened. I do know today from personal experience that the running tests can kind of be hit or miss. Debugging tests can kind of be hit or miss. But I think the big win for us would be the ability to make that experience, the development experience, a lot better. I don't think we're going to get to like the live unit testing that Visual Studio has.
Yeah.
But if we can make it so that there's at least something presented to the user that these tests passed, these tests failed, that would really help them.
Is testing a part of the language server protocol? Or
No, it is not. So I have a high level idea of what I want to do. I just have to execute on that idea, so I'm not quite there. But a high level idea, I'd like to be able to extend. So the language server protocol is open for extension. If you create an extension and no client uses it, it doesn't really help anybody. But that ability to sort of light features up as they're available, I want to explore building out what that extension of the protocol might look like, and then implementing that in VS Code. So sort of step one was to get VS Code to run off of the language server protocol for OmniSharp. So today it doesn't quite do that, mainly because I'm trying to get all the tests to pass, because I don't want to break things. I want to break people. Right. Because I go, okay, I'm going to go take out the entire thing that runs all of OmniSharp VS Code for all of its issues that it may have. I don't want to add more. Under the covers by just being like, okay, I'm going to rip this thing out and put the same thing back in a slightly different form. So I don't want to break anybody. At the same time, once we can get that implemented into VS Code, adding new features becomes much simpler. I don't know if anyone's done language server experience. That's the thing you're watching, but implementing a language client is not too difficult in VS Code. You have to sort of understand what you're plugging into. But the thing is, you can just create a nice feature. They call them features when you're implementing it, and then you create a custom feature. You add it to the language client class. And then if that server supports that feature, it just works. And then you can have that call out whatever VS Code APIs you need it to call. And then on the server side, the same thing. As long as you implement the feature in the right way, then both sides can communicate fairly easily. Otherwise, doing like a testing scenario thing is, you have to go create some methods over here, figure out how to call them.
Right.
And you get into the case of, well, okay, great. Now we have this feature. How can Emacs use it? How can Vim use it? How can any of these other editors use it? And so I want to make that simpler.
Right. We have someone here in the chat coming from Twitch, and he's saying, I'm having working under .NET 5. And when he said that, it kind of made me think, what does it actually take for OmniSharp to support new language, new runtime versions, new versions of C#? Like, is that just upgrading to the latest version, or I'm guessing like there's more work under the covers that happen?
So I don't know if you ever heard the adage of sometimes when you're on the bleeding edge, you get cut. You get lots of cuts. So we'll have to pick up. And this is something that hopefully we can improve in the future, at least with integrations on the Microsoft side. Is sometimes we have to consume beta bits. We have to consume bits that don't even exist in NuGet somewhere. Or we have to wait for the NuGet bits to come, which sometimes is too late.
Right.
Like we're sort of outside of the outside of the
bubble.
The bubble for how things get published.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to react really quickly and get it working. Philip does a really good job with trying to keep those things up to date whenever they happen. But yeah, for the most part, to get .NET 5 and soon .NET 6, they're going to start betas at some point, probably in a couple months, I'm sure. Right. So to get that, we have to make sure we get the latest MS build, the latest Roslins all installed, and make sure that they don't break any of the existing stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it's definitely more than just upgrade version and run, right? There's more things that are inside it. Got it.
Yeah, because we every once in a while we find bugs, and they have to be fixed.
Right. Okay. All right. And so we talked about new versions of .NET. I'm kind of interested about different .NET workloads, and if there's anything special that has to happen with the different workloads. And talking about workloads, I mean desktop is a separate workload from web, which is a separate workload from maybe doing Xamarin work. You know what I mean? Does OmniSharp support all of the different workloads? And what is there anything special that needs to happen there?
I mean, we already talked about Unity a little bit. So Unity is one of those workloads we got to support. And then, yeah, there's so Xamarin. I don't know if I've seen many Xamarin developers using VS Code, mainly because they also do XAML, and so we don't have a XAML editor.
Yeah.
I don't know of anyone that's tried to build one in VS Code. Early on, it wasn't really possible. The last 2 years or so, they've added APIs to you can draw your own custom web page now. So someone could theoretically build a XAML editor, although I don't know if anyone's going to.
Right.
But now with Maui and things going more code first, then that's not so bad. For Xamarin specifically, I don't know if people have or don't. We do have like with Windows, you still have to have the MS Build stuff installed, which kind of conflates things and I'm sure makes people really confused. Like, why do I need this?
Yeah.
But then that opens up desktop scenarios if you want to build with build a Forms app in Core or something like that. As far as like legacy workloads, I'm not sure if that's the right word for like legacy ASP.NET. Those aren't really supported. You can open up the project to do some coding, but starting it is a non-starter, just because it requires starting IIS Express up in the right way and those kind of features. So I don't think we're isolated from workloads, and if you have a workload that doesn't work, I'd love to hear about it to make sure that we can try to make sure it works.
Right, for sure. And they could always reach out to you on the Slack channel or create an issue or something like that. And
or even just ping me on Twitter.
Nice. So that being said, David, I know we're coming close to the top of the hour. Is there anything else that you'd love for our audience to know about OmniSharp, about how it works, how to contribute, and anything else that's coming forward in the future?
That's a great question. Really good questions.
I try to ask good questions. That's my job.
No, I'd love for people, just if you have concerns, if you have issues or whatever, to raise them up. But just try and keep in mind that we're a team of volunteers trying to do this work, and there's only so much time in the day that we have for work and our families, and then to come back and do other stuff. And it's not that we're trying to brush you off or trying to not do what you want. That's a really difficult thing to do that you're asking, generally speaking. Why do you have to restart OmniSharp? Well, there's a multitude of reasons, which requires sitting down, replicating it with a profiler attached and figuring out what is going on, and then understanding even some of the Roslyn internals. We're not developers on the Roslyn team, and so there may be something that we misunderstood or we're not aware of, and so helping educate us if you know or have an idea is also helpful. Even if you don't want to complete the solution, if you point us in the right direction, that can also help.
Right, for sure. And like you said a little bit earlier too, if folks are interested in contributing, if people are interested in maybe just learning how to get set up and just hacking on OmniSharp on your machine, definitely again send David a message, send his team a message, let them know, and then they could figure it out. I'm actually curious, how big is the OmniSharp team exactly?
So the core group right now is about 5, I think. So we have Joey. Okay. Joey is one of Microsoft employees. Another Microsoft guy, Fred, has been doing a lot of work too. I think he's on like an ARM Linux machine or something. So he's really focused on scenarios that don't work on his machine when he's trying to use VS Code, which is awesome to help. We have Philip, who's I can never remember what country he's in.
Is he in Switzerland, I think, or something?
Switzerland, or hell, he was in Canada at one point. He's moved around. And then there's Martin as well, and he's been super helpful with with sort of picking up Slack. He does a lot of work on the cake side as well. Nice,
awesome. All right, well, David, I think that's about it for the show today. I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Again, this has been our first on .NET live stream for the year. So, hopefully, you and everyone else in the audience will join us in the future for some more, more content that we have plans. And at any time at all you want to come on again, we could definitely talk about doing that other session where we actually walk through doing the OmniSharp thing. I think that'd be pretty cool to try out.
Yeah, I think just trying to get started would be great. I mean, I try to make sure that most of our stuff is buildable on anybody's machine, but I've been locked on Windows for a very long time. WSL has opened some doors, which are great. And now that I have a Mac, hopefully I can at least help with a more breadth solution of, oh, you're having that problem on a Mac. Well, now I can spin it up.
Got it. For sure. All right, man. Well, hey, again, thank you so much, David. Thank you all of you for watching. This has been another episode of On.NET Live, and I hope we'll see you again next week. See you, everybody.
Thanks for your questions. Bye, everybody.